All right. So, some of y'all told me already, you listened to me for 2 hours already this morning. Now, 2 to 3 minute segments in my defense over the course of 2 hours. But thank you for tuning in to local radio. Yeah, absolutely. And you might have heard a segment about what we're going to discuss in more detail right now. We're going to get into Philippians chapter 1, picking up in the 3rd verse, and like we've been doing the last several weeks, bite off a chunk and see what we can find. Let's talk about Paul for just a second, not get lost too far down any rabbit holes that I would enjoy, but we're talking about a man who is facing a death sentence. Now, you probably haven't been in front of a judge and jury to receive yours, but we did pray earlier for folks that have been given theirs. And it comes to us in many forms. Ugly words like cancer. Yeah. Nasty words like dementia. Okay? Ickiness like renal failure. And then somebody will have to ask you, well, what's that? Oh, that's something you don't want to know. You'd be blessed if you didn't know what that was all about, right? You know, we remember our brother Al, who's in our joys and concerns. And he told me to tell his church family, in spite of the circumstance, he's doing quite well. But he's been handed his, has he not? I sat next to him and his mother the other day, and we reasoned over death sentences. He said some ice cream might taste good. If you wear a mask and follow the protocol, you can go at any time to Marigold, come in through the front door. He's not too far away from that main hallway, and he'd love to see you, would love your cards. From time to time I call, but ask for some brevity. You know, I wasn't the only person seeing him that day. He's a popular guy. That's what happens when young people get death sentences. That was Paul. He wasn't some old grandpa. You know, he was a relatively young man, as our world would deem it. And he was a shut-in. Anybody know what that's like for the last 2 years? What if being a shut-in wasn't much of a change for you when a pandemic sprung up? Well, Paul was under house arrest, or we talk about an in-home prison. But you know, you get snowed in a couple of days, you start doing things like climbing the wall. And Paul didn't have Google and a smartphone and TikTok to lose hours of time with, did he? He didn't have the Hallmark Channel with the same plot hour after hour. You know, I'm not knocking your Hallmark Channel if you really love that. And Paul was having it pretty rough. Paul didn't know the love of a woman, so says history. He wasn't married. Paul didn't know about little kids playing around him too much because he didn't have kids. What Paul did have was a church family. And they was like his husband and wife type relationship. They was like his brothers and sisters and sons and daughters and deep, meaningful friendships. And so he wrote a love letter. He wrote a love letter over 1,000 years ago that's so ooey and gooey and rich with the affectionate words of love. We still read it today. That's why it's a 96-year-old's favorite book of the Bible. And it might be mine too. I do find a lot of meaning and purpose around this book, but I said we wouldn't get too far down a rabbit hole, and here we already are. Just want you to understand what he was facing. If you think you got tough odds in front of you today, the writer of this love story, this love letter, this thank you note of love was facing his most challenging time of his life. And I'll ask you, good people that are worshiping here today, you ever written a love letter? Now go back into your mental Rolodex, because I passed some notes in junior high I wish I never had. I gave some letters, I put stamps on things, and I saved, you know, if you like me, you got a box somewhere, you got a tub somewhere with maybe some ancient history of yours, and if you go back and revisit, like, oh, I dated her? I felt this way about him? Or I'll give you another one in terms of love letters. You know, we kind of live on a budget at our house. We got a lot of people to feed, right? Maybe you need to get creative around the holidays. And, my wife isn't so much into me gluing pieces of macaroni to a paper plate anymore. So I took last year and I wrote to my wife every day of Advent. And then on Christmas Day, I handed her 25 pages of what I just tried to fill with love. Didn't focus on nothing else. I'm telling you, it was a challenging joy to write 25 pages where it wasn't redundant. I'm going to say the same thing to you today that I said yesterday. And you know what happened? A while later, I received a gift of 25 pages of love letters from my wife. Now, she's the kind of person where if we get, something sweet, she's not going to save any for later. She's going to go right at it. And that's how she read her love letters. I wanted mine to stretch as far as I could. Like, ugly Christmas sweaters. I wanted to keep it around as long as I could. So I'd read a few each day. Oh, man, and they would feel good to me. But okay, I'm picking on this relationship I have with my wife, and that might add some salt to a wound for you. Because I'm living in an experience that maybe you no longer are, or wish you could, or fill in the blank, right? I ain't trying to be nasty, and I'm not trying to conjure up something negative. And Paul wasn't writing to a woman, so let's get off of that. You ever received a card in the mail that seemed to come at just the right time? And it maybe wasn't a whole lot to it. Relative in size, the paper was pretty small, but the few words in there, man, it had such a profound impact of you that it's the kind of thing, when you receive a letter like that, you don't necessarily, you display it, don't you? It goes on the fridge. It goes on the mantle. It makes its way to the scrapbook. It becomes something that you could read again and again. And that's what's going on here. This is a love letter that is as deep and as enriching as some of the relationships we've already been talking about. Okay, I'll get off the where I was before. A few weeks ago, I do an unsturdy newsletter. Some of y'all get it via email. Some people get it via snail mail. If you'd like to receive it either way, shoot me an email and I'll get it to you. But 20-some years ago, I put out my first unsturdy newsletter. It means I wrote something down, words of encouragement, put stamps on it, prayed over these letters, and sent them out to people with an opportunity for them to write back to me. A pandemic reinvigorated this unsturdy newsletter, and just last week, a woman who's had her death sentence, who's under house arrest, we had a tough time, didn't we? And we cried together. And I told her I ain't getting paid more because I could churn out some tears about you. I said, these are authentic because I care about you. And she said, here, I wanted to mail these to you, but I couldn't get myself to do it. And she handed me 4 letters that she had written. You could tell all the effort that went into each pen stroke because health, illness, they're all a factor in legible writing. And here she told me in letter after letter what was on her heart and how she felt and how much she loved and how much suffering was a part of that. You've had these things. You've shared in these experiences. You might have a card on your way this holiday season. You might need to be a person who needs to write one this holiday season. And then you get into January and you're like, well, that was a pretty good idea in December. Let's keep this going. Paul was a shut-in, facing a death sentence, but he was communicating God's love in such a way that we're still worshiping God today. Isn't that amazing? How much stock do you put into your words of affection and love for another? And do you think if I share this in the right way, 1,000 years from now, somebody might still have the opportunity to live in love because I did this? Maybe you think, well, that's to think too much of myself. No, that's to realize just how small we are, yet how big the impact and how far it can reach. Paul was not facing a death sentence thinking like, man, about 1,800 years from now, I'm going to be really cool. Some guy in an ugly Christmas sweater is going to be talking about me. It wasn't like that. But he was expressing joy and gratitude and confidence and affection and longing for the people he was writing to. This love letter, like we already said, it's a beautiful thank you note of unwavering support. And let's read a portion together now, starting in the 3rd verse. It'll be on the screens. My translation will be slightly different from the New Living Translation. Every time I think of you, I give thanks to my God. Whenever I pray, I make my requests for all of you with joy. For you've been my partners in spreading the good news about Christ from the time it began and you heard it until now. Every time I think of you, I think of our trip to New Orleans when you took a week off of work and decided to come down in late July to a place that was 110 degrees and 100% humidity, and you thought you were going to work with little kids, but then you showed up one day at an abandoned lot where a house had been torn down, and you were told you were going to chop down all those weeds and still playing with little kids. And you and people much older than you set out to working so hard that you didn't stop because that old lady 20 years on you, she didn't stop. And we went and bought a weed whacker. We felt like we were cutting down trees with a weed whacker. I'll never forget it. Every time, at every remembrance of you, I remember being at your mom's bedside when she was dying. And I remember having the best conversation with you, and nobody else was there. One of the best conversations I had with my father-in-law came from his mom dying. Isn't that something? Every time I think of this man, I think of that experience. Whenever I think of you, I think of the countless times that we have broken bread together, or we had a cup of coffee together, or we had a meeting together, or we shared a birthday party together. You see how this goes. I'm so thankful to have these times with you that it brings all this emotion to me. And then I think, like, we should have recorded that conversation for our podcast that still has to have episode 1. Because we would just get lost in conversation. We could have stayed there all day, couldn't we? That coffee was gone and it had grown cold, and still we sat there and had fellowship with one another. When you don't know how to pray in this life, which is quite often for me and so many people that I encounter, you take where life has been the toughest on you, like it is and like it has been for Paul, and you remember your own cup of suffering, and then you remember the old days. You remember the good times. As we discussed during Joys and Concerns maybe a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about knee pain. And all these people connected over that pain. I've had people ask me about some recent ailments in my life. You know why they ask me? Because they know what it's like and they don't want me to hurt. And so they come and they tell me and they give me these well wishes. That's how you transform these concerns into prayers. And you let people know that you thank God for them. I don't want to tell you folks that I thank God for you when I'm up here preaching at you. I want to do it when we're breaking bread. I want to write you that card. I want to greet you as you come through the door. And I don't want to be the guy to corner you in the checkout aisle at the grocery store. Let somebody else do that. I want to be the person, when you see my number come up on your phone, you don't go, ugh. And I want to feel the same way about you too. And so when you are conjuring up these thoughts and these feelings, use all that fuel to turn it into prayer by saying, "Dear God," at the beginning, and maybe you throw an amen at the end, or maybe you figure out how to live a lifetime of prayer because you are facing that death sentence. You are that shut-in. You are in that season of life where if he tells me to stand up one more time, I'm going to have to stay seated. You know what I mean? And all of this produces what Paul calls joy. And joy is the idea to rise above your circumstances, no matter how happy or sad we feel. And pardon me, I've been wanting to do that for a few minutes now. Joy means everything we go through can produce it. Joy means every time you cross my mind, I get this inner tranquility and peace that comes over me, and I want to live in that experience. I would go back if I could. I'd do anything to share in that moment again. But everything we've talked about thus far is a loving, joyous experience, also coupled with suffering. So how much do you want to relive? And at what cost would you do so in order to gain this joy? But it's as if this could be something that you would go towards in any and every circumstance. That life may be on the line, but we can still rejoice when mother joins child bedside and her child is soon going to die. Life may be on the line, but we can still rejoice and encourage others on every remembrance. So I would want to encourage you the way Paul is encouraging in this love letter, this thank you note. Don't let your present condition rob you. Don't let it steal from you the joy that we're trying to exemplify and focus on during this Advent season. And don't make it just a Christmas thing. Cultivate this in the everyday living of this life, knowing that there will come seasons of grief and loss because we have suffered through them before. It has not killed us. It has not crushed us. We have not quit, and we are still here. But more challenges will be on the way. Cultivate joy. Turn your concerns to prayer and keep growing and knowing Christ. It's the only way you're going to make it. And this love letter continues in the 6th verse. I am certain that God who began a good work in you, within you, will continue his work until it's finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. So it's right that I should feel as I do about you, for you have a special place in my heart. You share with me the special favor of God, both in my imprisonment and in defending and confirming the truth of the good news. God knows how much I love you and long for you with the tender compassion of Christ Jesus. I am certain you supported the Unsturdy newsletter in 2004 because I sent it to only about 30 people. And 3 people not only wrote me back, but they sent this fool some money so he could try to be a missionary in the lawless underbelly of our society known as New Orleans, and specifically the French Quarter. And you know who one of them was? A little old lady I call my granny. Never has not supported him. And I'm convinced and sure that she has shared in my weaknesses as I have shared in hers. And there has never been the slightest doubt as to the love I have for you when we lost our first child. Our staircase had a turn. And I stood at that landing while you miscarried. And I never heard somebody cry the way you cried. And she's strong enough to hear me talk about it now, because I've used it as a teachable moment before, because we learned a lot. And I knew the ache of all of that real clear, but I was convinced, and there has never been a slightest doubt, because you made it through that experience, you will make it through what you're going through now. And I feel sure and confident with all assurance that no one has chosen to put their neck on the line and have me as their minister before this church. No one has done that. Well, I'm good for a Sunday here or there. I'm good for a sabbatical. I'm good for a fill-in, but I ain't never been good enough for every Sunday. Y'all are the first to believe. I love you, and I long for you. When we were 1,000 miles apart, I still had you in my heart and in my mind. How far have you been away from the people you love? How many miles between you? Did that change anything? Might feel like there's a lifetime between you now. There's something standing between you now, and it's living and dying. How far is the distance? Can your love reach that far? Can your love reach far enough to eternity? I love you and long for you and pursue you with all love. Because, we have actively served in ministry. We have gone door to door and collected canned goods for Fish Food Pantry. Yeah? We have joined together in the raising of children who need a home to live in, who desire presents at Christmas time, who hope their lives will not exist living out of trash bags. I long with the deepest Christian love and affection for your companionship. And Paul is expressing, as we know this to be true, when I needed a partner and a real friend and somebody that when I called, they would answer no matter the time, I could count on you to be that person. We all have that short list. For some of us, we wish the list was longer. But I know when I need advice, when I need wisdom, I don't have speed dial anymore, but the people I call all the time who I value their opinion, they're saved in my contacts, but I know y'all's numbers by heart too. King James says this. This is how verse 6 reads. I love you in the bowels of my being. Now, I've riffed on bowels before. It ain't what you think, okay? Don't get out the Miralax just yet, okay? Bowels in the King James means the depth of your being. Bowels in the King James means this is when I come over and crash on your couch and you don't ask me how long I'm going to be there. I love you to the bowels of my being because I listen to you sob and cry like a baby and have gunk and nastiness come out of every hole you got because you have done that for me. When the crumbled up Kleenexes were mine, you offered me more, and vice versa. I love you in the bowels, in the seat of my emotion, to the depths of who I am that nobody else really knows about. You, lucky one, you know me there. So when my death sentence is here and there's thousands of miles between us and I wish you could be at my bedside, your love is active and present because love is rooted in the compassion of Jesus Christ. And that's how it's possible for you and I to be held in the hearts of others. Love. The love of God makes it possible for you and I to have a special place in each other's hearts. That when you say phrases like church family, you actually mean it because you really feel it and you do see it. There needs to be more of that this time of year. There needs to be more of that every day of the year. And how many hours of sermonizing do you think has gone into saying that exact message? What are we waiting for? Prayer and hope. Last week, joy. This week, peace. Paul was facing what we've already talked about, and there were many hindrances. But his prayers and his hopes, they are all deeply rooted in his reality. He doesn't have his head in the clouds. And he's not buried in the sand trying to avoid reality. Reality is what is encouraging his prayer life. Reality is what is providing joy for him now. We shouldn't turn love into a duty. Love shouldn't be a job or a chore that we bark back against. It's tender compassion and mercy that we want to believe God has given to human beings. Then it's our job to show other human beings that these things exist in a godly way because, yes, when life is on the line, you share your love with each other because we will share in the suffering too. Let's continue on. 9 through 11. I pray that your love will overflow. More and more, I pray your love will overflow. And that you will keep on growing in the knowledge and understanding. For I want you to understand what really matters, so that you may live pure and blameless lives until the day of Christ's return. May you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation, the righteous character produced in your life by Jesus Christ. This will bring much glory and praise to God. Your love will overflow when a doctor tells you it is time for hospice care. As a chaplain, I see it every day. I bear witness to that truth every day. I pray that your love may abound when the job is so rough that you hate it. I pray that your love may abound when retirement is not what you thought it would be. I pray that your love would abound when you have no family to spend Christmas with. I pray that your love would abound when nobody writes you this word of encouragement. I pray that your love would abound when it does add pain when I talk about the joy within my own life. That your love may be on display in greater depth because of death, because of unbearable pain. I was talking to my wife the other day about the pain I've had in my back and my leg for weeks now. And I'm trying to figure out why I have this pain. And I'm praying to God that God would take away this pain. But I said, Lindsay, I am preaching on peace and joy. And the biblical writers are telling me that I need to experience these in the pain and the suffering now. So I'm trying to figure that out without causing you too much pain and suffering. But you know how this shared experience of living this life can be. And you know that Paul just said he wants us to live blameless lives. And you know that you walked in here as flawed as the guy in the ugly Christmas sweater and Tim. There we go. Still got to laugh. Good, good. Great sweatshirt, buddy. That your love will flourish. And that you will not only love much, but well. Don't you like how that sounds? Let's read it again. That your love will flourish, and that you will not only love much, but well. I don't think the man I saw whose face lit up like a Christmas tree at the thought of ice cream was about the ice cream. I think it was who he shared the cream with. You get me? What really matters? That's the title of the sermon. What really matters? In another translation, that ye may be sincere. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And then back it up with a lifetime of action. Learn to sense what is vital. Approve things that are excellent. Discern what is best. Recognize the highest and best. These are all different translations of that same verse, but do you see the broad spectrum of understanding that only comes with reading love letters more than once? Some people I know used to keep a love letter under their pillow. Some people, well, they go straight to the scrapbook. And some people, when they die, you put them in the casket next to them. Because you remember every word. And the symbolic nature of which you give that gift is you trust it's already been given to you. And that faith tells you it could arrive again. And it might be endless and eternal. And it's easy for us Christians to get lost, isn't it? Especially this time of year. It's easy to get lost and believe that love can't find you. But I want to challenge you and believe that it doesn't need to find you because it's already here. Available, ready, active, before you ever knew the word. And this is the righteousness God has planted in us with his love. But let us remember, his love that we speak of did involve dying on a cross. How heavy is your burden this day? Little 10-year-old who's watching me now, I hate to think that you carry a cross. Don't you hate to think of a young person carrying a cross? Yet it was the young person that we were thinking, oh, are they going to make it another day? Are they going to survive another 24 hours? Does a God of love, does it exist in these lives of suffering? And faith will allow you to believe that righteousness is real because it's planted in your bowels of who you are, the depths of who you are. That's where love grows the best. That's the original spot. That's the birth moment. Do you base your hopes on the future, on what God has done for you in the past? Do you think of the future in terms of escaping this life? Or do you base your hopes on the future because it's a completion of what has already begun? Friends, brothers and sisters, love is already here. And there is no other way to access this love than through a personal relationship with Jesus. So let's close this message in a prayer as we tune our hearts and minds to sharing in the Lord's Supper. And we'll close it with the words of Paul. So this is my prayer, that your love will flourish and that you will not only love much but well. Learn to love appropriately. You need to use your head and test your feelings so that your love is sincere and intelligent, not sentimental gush. Live a lover's life, circumspect and exemplary. A life Jesus will be proud of, bountiful in fruits from the soul, making Jesus attractive to all, getting everyone involved in the glory and praise of God. Amen. Love, it's what really matters, y'all. Let us stand and sing our hymn of communion.